our second guest hopped on, and she is Dr. Dawne Collier. And in high school, I was best friends with Dawn's little sister. We were
I
inseparable.
know. We go back, right?
We were two annoying
This
little
is
girls
perfect.
who,
Yeah. I
who
was
bugged
probably
Dawn all the time.
driving them around to some little party, back in the day. So yes.
Yes. And so she grew up to be a doctor, and she went to
Yeah.
Ohio State University College of Medicine. She did her residency at the Henry Ford Hospitals in Detroit. And this girl is a best-selling author of Clever Girl. And she's also a motivational speaker because Dawn takes it upon herself to teach young girls about their bodies. And she found a creative way to do it. She did a creative because she knew that these conversations weren't happening and little girls were
Yeah.
still calling their body parts PP and wee wee. And she wanted to be able to be proactive so
Yeah.
that they can take pride in their bodies and therefore take control over their bodies. And she is board certified and she practices as an OB-GYN. And I'm not going to stumble with obstetrics and gynecology like I normally do. OB-GYN. And so with
Right.
that,
Right.
I'm gonna bring Dawn on. And so, Dawn, you've heard some of the conversation, and I also
Yeah.
want to talk to you about what was your knee-jerk response when you heard about the
Mm.
Dobbs-Jackson decision as it relates to your area of practice.
We were just really saddened. I was actually on labor and delivery when the verdict came down. And where I'm at, we have a specific uh, Center for Complex Family Practice, or planning rather. So we have physicians that are specifically working with women that are working through these issues and how they plan on, ending a pregnancy for whatever reasons. Um, Anytime you have a procedure that you're doing, any surgery you have, you're at risk. You're at risk for bleeding, you're at risk for complications, and that's in the best, experienced hands. You can still have that. Um, and so my real concern and everyone's concern is what these women are going to do with these pregnancies that they cannot get any legal help for. And one thing I have to mention is, and I brought to April's attention, is where does something like ectopic pregnancy fall in line, right? We see that very commonly, and technically, these are pregnancies. You may or may not see a heartbeat. And with an ectopic pregnancy, that pregnancy is not inside the uterus, it's outside of the uterus. More likely than not, it's in the tube of your uterus. Sometimes it's in the adnexa. We just had a case where the pregnancy was actually in the incision of a prior C-section. So the body does what it wants, but the end result is that the uterus is very much um, full of vessels, blood vessels, that you have very little time, if those vessels rupture, to get that woman to safety. And so the problem I have with all of this is that when we talk about women will die, that's not something that we're saying lightly. Um, these women, if they're truly wanting to get abortions, are now going to go to people who, back alley, or just like they're doing the BBL in somebody's, basement. They'll do the DNC, or they'll do a procedure that will get rid of these pregnancies. And it's not going to end well. It's not going to end well in a large percentage of those women. And I think the problem I have is that these things are available to do it safely. And so when we are only considering the life of this unborn fetus, like we say, it's a baby or it's a child, until it's born, it's not a baby, it's not a child. Any number of things can happen that can lead to a pregnancy being not going full term. So it can be a stillbirth. She can have an abruption. Anything can happen where that pregnancy doesn't go full term. And so we are now assuming that every pregnancy is going to end up in a live pregnancy, and that's not true. And we're assuming that this birth is more important than the woman who's carrying it. And the issue I have is that when she has that baby, we don't give any type of, protection or care to that woman. We don't provide her with childcare. We don't provide her with jobs that are so she can take care. We don't provide them with, care so that she can work. We don't give them stuff, money so that they can buy food, get a place to live. And there's a cycle of poverty that we truly see where these ladies are coming in and they've had 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 pregnancies. And you know that even with your own job, even with a partner that's contributing, you can't afford all the things that need to be had for a person to do well. So my feeling at first was just sadness, because there's going to be a lot of bloodshed when trying to get through what we need to do to make this safe again.
Yeah, and that's what I want to talk about. So I think I just have an especially, I'll put in quotes, woke timeline. And so I haven't seen some of the nonsense on social media, but I do know that there, are Black conservative super Christians, as I call them, Bible thumpers, who were rejoicing about the Dobbs decision. And I am adamant about letting women know that whether you are in the cushy confines of Chicago, Illinois, or some other blue state, you're still going to be affected. And so I had sent you that one scenario, but about basically a woman who had some difficulty with her pregnancy, or like you said, or had an ectopic pregnancy, who lived in a blue state, traveled to a red state for work, and that's where the crisis struck. So you live in Chicago, you fly to Dallas, all of a sudden you have this ectopic pregnancy that you need immediate attention for. You go to a Dallas hospital, and possibly, maybe not Dallas, maybe what some other state, but a lot of these laws, and I'm sure Michelle can attest to this, a lot of these laws are vague about how they define a fetus. At what point do they define it as a baby? Some of them, like you were saying, like define this as a person. So this sick woman needs immediate treatment. She's in a red state that defines the fetus in her fallopian tubes as a baby, and suddenly it's between her life and the so-called quote babies, and she's away from home and can't get care anywhere else. I think we're going to see that a lot, especially as the world is opening back up. People are traveling more, as we hear there are all these cancellations, so the airports are packed, so women are moving around, and anything could happen, and you're traveling to some other state and you're stuck between life and death. So can you speak on that?
I think what also happens is that most of us that are providers and obstetrical, providers, we're not going to not do the right thing by that person, right? But what you're going to find is, unfortunately, then we're going to have to deal with the lawsuits or whatever happens after performing, procedures that need to be done, right? So like when a woman is here for a C-section, we have to make sure we have that consent signed. Because if you don't have the consent signed, then you're almost, I won't say it's manslaughter, but it's a law that you're, going against if you're acting on the woman without her consent, right? So we make sure that that's done. But this is a whole new territory that we're going to be in, where you're doing a procedure that the woman wants, agrees to, but the laws of that state are against. And what are you going to do in those dire situations that are already set up and have the capabilities of doing that, right? Like we already have ORs, we already have suction, machines that can do the procedure. We already have laparoscopes so we can go in and take care of this tubal pregnancy. And I say without reserve that the doctors would just do it, right? Like we're not going to sit here and watch a woman die that wants to have the procedure. But the end result and how we come out of that, like what happens, is it going to be a police there at the hospital there that's going to, arrest us? Or are we going to be arrested in our offices? That's what we don't know. And even in the blue states where these things are available, now we're going to be inundated with patients. How do you prioritize? How do you ensure that these people are not in harm's way, either coming or leaving? It's just a lot of things that are in play that we really haven't had time to prepare for, that we are now working to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that in the blue states, yeah, you'll be facing lawsuits probably from women in the red states. But
Yep.
I think
Yep.
that what'll happen is in the red states, there will be droves of doctors who are arrested,
Yep.
literally.
Yep.
And whether it's because the medical staff calls or because the significant other of that woman calls the police, I
Yep.
think they will literally be arrested. And what's interesting, and while you were talking, I remembered that these doctors aren't necessarily from those states. Y'all do with the
Oh,
match system where you get sent
yeah.
anywhere in the country that wants you.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
you got doctors all, they don't necessarily share the political beliefs of the community that they live in. They're not
Well,
necessarily,
if they're
yeah.
providing those services, then it's obvious that they have something that's not in agreement necessarily with, what the state law is for abortions, right? If you're performing that procedure because you're an OB doesn't mean you have to perform it. So there are plenty of doctors that, for religious reasons, personal reasons, don't do abortions, don't do the procedures, and basically if you're on staff, you let it be known, and we don't force you. We just get physicians that are willing to do it to do those procedures. But you're exactly right. Like after the match, people are doing their residency programs. Attendings would be doing the procedures with with the resident, but that attendant could be from Chicago and working in Texas just because the residency was there, and they just kind of planted roots and stayed there. Especially if they know that there's a hostile environment, so they want to ensure that there are providers there that can give the care that's needed, because it's dwindling. A lot of OBs are not doing it for different reasons. So those that do it are inundated.
I also worry about not only the doctors who are practicing now, but what about our future doctors, right? Who's in medical school right now saying, you know what, I had wanted to deliver babies, but I'm not going anywhere near that profession now, which ultimately means that everywhere over the country, women are going to get less health care,
And
right?
also the residents not being able to get the training, right? If you're
Yep.
in a red state that, has now forbidden, we know how to do abortions that are pretty much in the first trimester. First trimester is 13 weeks. But if you do a second trimester, D&E or dilation and evacuation, those are more learned procedures that you really have to seek out and get extended training, right? So the average OB can do a miscarriage 13 weeks, but you're talking about somebody 18 weeks, 20, 22 weeks. You got to get extra training for that. And some of the residency programs will provide that. And they also have fellowships that provide that. But now none of that's going to be available. So if you're talking about 26, 28 states who've now put these laws in play, then you have 26 residency programs, and most states have more than one, but all of these residency programs where future physicians that potentially wanted to give those services no longer can do it. And then you have doctors now who have the training who literally have no job. When I talked to one of the docs who, works closely in this area, she's like, I have doctors who literally have no source of income right now because of this law.
Wow.
Yeah, you know what? I mean, you all are both making my wheels turn. So one thing that just annoys me in general is, and I know we're about to see this. So basically what the Supreme Court did, ultimately what they said is we're throwing this back on the individual states to, it's the Wild West. Do what you want.
Right.
That's initially what they said, and they're going to do that with each of these decisions. We're throwing it back on the states. So then what happens at the state level is these legislators run and scribble something out. And so, and I'm not saying it's not a thoughtful scribbling, but what I have found, and I don't know if Michelle has seen this in her practice too, is that oftentimes laws are written by politicians who don't have boots on the ground, who have absolutely no training in the area that they are writing
Writing
this
those
law
laws
in.
for.
They're getting it approved, they're getting it passed, and then the actual practitioners are left. This happens all the time in criminal law, where the cop, the judge, the prosecution, and me, we are all literally sitting in court scratching our heads, looking like nobody thought this through, because nobody had the training that we have. And what I'm listening to Dawne talk, I was like, this is a very high level conversation. This is very complicated. And the majority of the people in the legislature, I'm not saying they're dumb people. I'm saying
No.
they are unsophisticated in this area. And I don't care how much consultation they have. I don't care if they even are thoughtful enough to do that, have consultation from medical experts. They are going to sit in the room and say, a baby is what happens at conception, and they're not going to think through these 100 different examples that pop into Dawn's mind without in her sleep. They're not going to
Just,
think the 1,000 examples that Michelle and I have pop into our minds as we are brushing our teeth. And these laws are going to be on the books, they're going to be
books
binding,
already.
and that is going to ruin lives.
And you touched upon this before, and I could, and it's interesting you said it because that's exactly what's happened. So you make friends with people on Facebook from years ago, and you don't know their, their thoughts about this until years later, right? So there was a person who's on my timeline who was staunch pro-life, and so because the majority of my people, are pro-choice, his stood out. And so on the day of when this came down, he was like, praise God, now all these babies are going to be saved and this, that, and the other. And I really had to, stop myself from responding because I would rather not respond so I can continue to look to see what he's saying and what his friends are saying. And so as I kept looking at his post, one of the things he said is like, they have procedures that they can do instead of having an abortion. They can take the baby out and put her in an incubator, and then the baby can still survive. They don't have to do these abortions. And I'm thinking to myself, I was like, this is the perfect example. And this is a person who is an attorney, right? And who can probably be one of those people to write these laws. And so he was very adamant about there being a procedure that we can do to take this fetus out and put them in an incubator so that they can survive. They don't have to have abortions. And I'm like, sir, you're not even viable until 22 weeks, right? Like we have ladies that come in for genetic reasons or obstetric reasons. They have to deliver. They have a preterm delivery, right? They deliver and their babies, they rupture the membranes, right? They rupture at 21 weeks. The questions we start to have is like, what do you want us to do for your baby if you deliver at 22 weeks? What happens if you deliver at 23 weeks? Now, we can do everything we can, but the issue is that the baby is not developed. The lungs are not developed. The brain is not developed. Nothing is developed, right? So even if you deliver a fetus at 23 weeks and they survive, they didn't die within the first 2 weeks, you're not out of the woods at all. You now have this fetus who's not getting the normal development cues from the body, from the woman, from the hormones and everything else. And so you have this undeveloped brain, you have this undeveloped, neural system. None of this stuff is developed, right? So now we have these women, these kids that are 2 or 3 down the line. They have problems in school. They're not learning. They're learning disability. They have problems with how they're moving around. They have motor development issues. All of things are happening because they were delivered at 23, 24 weeks. Now we're saying that we're going to have these ladies push these deliveries, and maybe they have these genetic abnormalities and they wouldn't have an abortion. And so we have more of these fetuses there. There's a general ignorance to what goes on and why these abortions are needed in some of these ladies and what we can do with medical, science to help these babies that are being born or not being born. And so that's the problem, is exactly what you say. They have a romanticized view of what we as physicians or whatever can do. And so they want to protect this life for all costs. And it's not going to work. It's not going to work.
I
You
read
just brought up
somewhere. Yeah, I read it somewhere. America loves fetuses and hates children
Yeah,
because they put nothing in place to actually
nothing.
catch this baby and support it once it's born. But we want to romanticize, like you said, when it's inside, it's romanticized. It's got to be protected. It's a
And
whole
yes,
person.
they
and
don't
And
talk back. They
what
don't talk
Michelle
back
said,
then.
is absolutely right. We have women, and I've been in my new, place that I work maybe for 2, 3 months, and I work in the OBED. We have so many women that come in that are pregnant, that have had battery, from their partner, right? They've been choked. They've been almost run down with cars. These are the fathers of their children. Domestic violence. And we know that pregnant women are at a higher risk for death from domestic violence for whatever reasons. So, what about helping those women, right? If you want her to keep her, where are we putting funds into protection, into, therapy, into helping these men with whatever issues they have? None of that is happening. Yet I'm seeing women that have choke marks on their throat from domestic violence. They're keeping the baby, but they still may not make it if this man kills her with the baby there. What about that?
There's a Facebook page called Black Femicide, and every single day there's another woman who's been pretty much for the most part killed by her partner. Sometimes her kids either witness it or are killed also. It's just so common, and we pretend like it's not there. It's the same thing with sexual assault. The people are like, rape doesn't happen, and yet the stats are like something like a third of women will be raped in their life, and then the stats for kids and molestation, it's huge, right? And then you have all these or not the parents, the people who are anti-choice, who are like, well, just have the fathers marry the mothers. I'm like, really? You really want the 41-year-old uncle to marry the 13-year-old niece? This doesn't make any sense to me. They're like not really thinking this out at
They're not
all.
realistic at all. They're romanticizing everything based on this, Judeo-Christian ideas that we have about relationships and marriage and family, that even when these things were out, when they started putting them out, they weren't being recognized.
Right.
So
I think
Well,
you
and
all
then
are
you,
both being very kind. I would say that most Americans are not critical thinkers. They cannot express themselves in written form or orally. I see it every day on my Facebook page when these haters come for my head and they can't even spell the word liar. They
right,
not
right.
they get stuck in their stance, and there's nothing you can say or do to change their mind, even if the facts are all laid out, because they don't know how to process facts.
No,
So I
no.
think you are both being very nice, and I don't think it really has much to do with religion, because if you ask most people, they don't even know the verse in whatever religion they practice.
Right.
well,
Well,
actually, both from what I'm reading, both in Judaism and in Islam, that they do allow for abortions early on in the pregnancy. So this, and there are a lot of Christians who would also argue that it is allowed, that the Bible is being misinterpreted. So who really is this? This is the evangelicals, right?
but it's
That's for the
not
most part.
it's not religion with this. This is misogyny, right? This,
Right,
this is under the
absolutely.
veil of Christianity. This is under the veil of this is what God
Good
wants.
point.
But what it really is about is maintaining control over women. It's being paternalistic and misogynistic, and it's also making sure that we have a poor population that's always there, so that we can control the resources, and we can always have people who are desperate enough to do the things that we need them to do, right? So
Talk.
we know that this is just a farce as to why they're doing this.
When you bring up controlling women, one of the other things that's going on with these laws is that they are talking about making sure that pregnant women who are in red states that have these laws will have to stay there. So
Yes,
we
I
have
saw
basically
that.
just decided that pregnant women have no rights to travel
Right.
anywhere in this country or out of this country.
No. Right.
That we are
Yep.
basically chained to a state as women. So once again, right, when you go to the patriarchy, that is a perfect example of that.
Yep.
And then following up on another point that you brought up is that these kids who are going to have severe disabilities, nobody is thinking about what this is going to mean for the educational systems across the country,
Look at
right?
CPS now.
hmm Special ed is expensive. It's really expensive, right? And people advocate all the time to get the best for their children. But now, imagine that at a just exponentially more necessary. these politicians aren't giving more money to education. So that
No.
means every kid in the public education system is going to be shortchanged. And we already see the black and brown kids who tend to be in the public education system more are shortchanged because
Already.
yep. So we that's like one of those unintended consequences we're not going to see for 5 years because those kids aren't going to enter the system to 5 years. And then in 5 years from now, you're going to see these teachers and these principals that are going to be rolling their eyes back in the back of their head. And we're already losing so many teachers because of these stupid laws that don't want to teach the reality of the history of America and are making teachers test to death. And then COVID just totally
I was gonna mention that.
exasperated
Yeah.
teachers.
Yeah.
So we're going to be short teachers anyway, right? And we see that college students are saying, "Why should I teach? You don't get paid enough, and it's a hassle." And you get in some of these states you can get sued for teaching actual history.
CRT. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Like that yesterday, it came out that there are people in Texas that want to change slavery
I saw that.
to yes. What
I
is
saw
it
that.
called?
Voluntary relocation.
Thank you.
Right. Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the law supports it. The law has already been passed, going to your point, April. The law has
Wow.
already been
Wow.
passed that they can't make the kids feel bad about anything. That's why you get that.
You can make
So
the
this
mom feel bad about, this pregnancy that she's been forced to keep. And here's the thing, they're not gonna keep them, right? Like you can put as many laws in place as you want. What you're gonna have is more and more women going to places that provide these things undercover without the right, jurisdiction, without the safety nets that are there. You're not gonna stop one person who really wants an abortion from getting it. They're going to get it. And you're going to have more people out there preying on these women and doing, underhanded things just because these women are so desperate. Because
They
they're
didn't.
not going to not get an abortion if that's what they decided to do.
so
They
I'm
didn't
gonna
stop
close us
women
out.
from not. Oh, I'm sorry. I
No,
was
go
just
ahead,
gonna
Mr. Stein.
say, I was gonna say, they didn't stop women in the '60s
No.
from getting abortions. They haven't stopped them in countries like Poland from right now, 2022, from getting
Wow.
abortions.
Wow.
So which is a country that prohibits it. So the reality is, you're right. They're going to continue to get abortions. They're just not going to get legal, safe abortions. And that's again, what does that mean? Women are going to die.
Exactly.
And then we didn't even get into how they're going to track us now with electronics and DNA technology and how this is going to be able to be proved now in ways that we didn't have to deal with in the 50s and 60s. Not that I was here. And
But I
so,
think they can with these electronic medical records. It's going to be very easy, unfortunately, for them to track. And because like now, these records are now being shared amongst hospitals. So if somebody has an EMR at Rush and their patient comes, or they have somebody at South Suburban, I'm at U of I can still see their records, right? And I can see their history as long as it's been uploaded. So I think, unfortunately, that's going to be a lot easier for them to track because all they have to do is put that diagnosis in. And once that diagnosis in, they can track them all the way through wherever that woman shows up in a system that uses EMRs and electronic medical records. And most hospitals do at this
and
point.
so now women who are pregnant are going to be scared to go to a doctor if they're thinking
Exactly.
about terminating. And so then
Exactly.
they are going to be more likely to have health issues.
Exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Because
So
we
that's a
always
great
find a way to get around it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way to start. This has been a very layered conversation. I'll have to invite the two of you back because this is just the beginning. Like we're going
Absolutely.
to see so many repercussions that none of the three of us could anticipate coming down the pike. So my
Yeah.
next show will be on August the 5th, which is also a Friday. I'm sure we'll be talking more of the same. And I'm sorry to all the listeners, this was way more important than R. Kelly's 30-year sentence. If you want to check that out, go to my Facebook page. I did a video on it yesterday and I'm still getting dragged.
Oh
So,
wow. Because you're here in Chicago. That's the only reason.
so Justice Junkie, JUSTUSJUNKIE. You can follow me on IG, Facebook. LinkedIn, you won't see much, but the other channels you will. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to Miss Xavier.
Okay, ladies, I have one question that you didn't necessarily touch on, and that is I heard, and I just want to know if this is true and how this is going to play into it. I heard that they are actually trying to make contraceptives illegal, starting with outlawing that morning after pill. Is that true? Have you guys heard that?
Yes.
I've heard that as well, you know. But I also heard the opposite, that the morning after pill is federally distributed so that the states really cannot make, influence how that is done. But I have to plead ignorant really on the whole situation because I don't know for sure.
Okay.
I think that right now there are no laws that make it problematic. Well, it depends how it's defined when a fetus is a fetus. So if the morning after, if there's actually been conception, then theoretically, then you have a fetus already. But you also have the situation with like Plan B, where people are taking this as protective measures, and the stores now are actually limiting how many packages you can actually get.
Mhm.
So there is some woman right now running to a drugstore to get Plan B, and there is nothing on the shelf. It reminds me sort of the same problem we had with formula, that mothers can't feed their kids. Now you have women who can't do their own health care that they could, a week ago, but now they can't because nothing's on the shelf.
Wow.
So
This
to
has
that
been
note, I've seen several people on Facebook say you can get Plan B on Amazon, buy it now and stock up. The other thing is there are other reproductive methods. Like I said, Clarence Thomas is coming for those too. So you can get the sponge in Israel. You can order that online, get whatever you can online, because I think that there will come a point that in some states the only thing available it will be condoms. So you need to prepare now, not be shell shocked and shook later, and then we can fight on the back end. But in the meantime, you really need to prepare. And again, even if you are a great grandma there's no possibility you've been through menopause 20 years ago, you need to be looking out because your great granddaughter is going to be affected, your granddaughter is going to be affected, your neighbor's going to be affected, your niece is going to be affected. And we can't do like we did with COVID, where it's just all about me. It's got to be about the community. It's got to be about all your sisters and all of us looking out for one another. So, with that, I'm going to end. Thank you, too, for joining us on the show today. It was fantastic.
all right.
My
Thank you,
pleasure.
ladies. Thank you. You guys have a great day.